Do you remember how you felt the morning after the referendum? I certainly do. I remember the glorious pink sunrise as I was walking back across Lambeth Bridge from Vote Leave headquarters. I remember the sense of optimism and possibility. It felt as though we'd stepped out of a stifling dark room and into a warm summer's day. Well, 5 years almost to the day since Brexit took effect, it doesn't feel like that. I think it's pretty uncontroversial to say that our opportunities have been squandered. Now, part of that was no one's fault. The day that Brexit took effect, the 31st of January 2020, was also the day that the first 2 cases of COVID were diagnosed in the United Kingdom. And a certain kind of bad faith Euro-nostalgist commentator has ever since then deliberately conflated those 2 events and has attributed to Brexit the cost of what was in fact the worst peacetime disaster we'd had economically, which was paying people to stay at home for the better part of 2 years. But even if we set all that aside, I think we should admit at this distance in time that the government let the ball drop. I was astonished that the country that had traditionally led the world in free trade was so reluctant to embrace proper commercial liberalisation, so in hock to a tiny part of our economy, which nonetheless has a sentimental hold over us, namely agriculture and food production, and that this would stand in the way of ambitious deals with Canada, the US, and so on. I was astonished by our slowness in deregulation, in seizing the opportunities that would come from faster growth as we could suit our own rules to our own conditions and needs. I'd imagine that outside the EU we could get out of some of the more silly energy boondoggles that drive up prices there. In fact, we used our Brexit freedoms to give ourselves even more expensive energy than we'd had while members of the bloc. The first time that Labour used its Brexit freedoms on VAT was to become the only, or almost the only, country in the developed world to tax education. So, without question, we have dropped opportunities and we failed to take the full advantage of what had opened up before us. And yet, as we survey the landscape 5 years on, we're still not doing badly versus the EU. We have outgrown the Eurozone since the referendum was held, and especially we've outperformed the countries that are most comparable to us, i.e. the large Western European economies like Italy, Germany, and France. And I notice creeping into the tone of Labour ministers some appreciation of the freedom to diverge, whether it's on AI rules or commerce with the United States. So the question is, are we going to have 5 more years of squandered opportunities? Or are we finally going to begin to regulate in our own interests and to take advantage of the global opportunities out there? What a pity it would be, having left that bloc after 50 years, just to sit sulkily on the doorstep and advance no further. This week, the Telegraph will be running a series on how to save Brexit, and we will be hearing from the biggest names and the greatest writers in the business. We'll be hearing from my old friend Douglas Carswell, a co-founder of Vote Leave, now in Mississippi, on whether Donald Trump might be the key that changes Britain's policy. We'll be hearing from the great David Frost, the man who held the pen on the negotiations themselves, about our options as a global trading country. And we will be hearing from Nigel Farage, the enormously successful leader of Reform UK, about whether Brexit on its own can solve our immigration crisis. And we'll be hearing from Kate Hoey, and we'll be hearing from John Curtis. So please stay tuned with the Daily Telegraph. Can Brexit be saved?